Tonight, we game. Now, that is what I say in an email to my gaming group every time it's game day and we have a game for that night. So I have a gaming group that we game online every Tuesday night. And I'll send an email out Tuesday morning with the title, or the subject title is Tonight We Game. And every time I type it out, I have that voice in my head. Tonight we game! And that's been kind of the theme of my Tuesday night gaming for the last several years. Ever since I started doing online gaming, as opposed to face-to-face gaming, I've been able to do a lot more gaming because, let me tell you, being an adult and trying to get your adult friends together in the same room for the same 4 hours is really fucking challenging. So started doing the online gaming and been much more successful in getting consistent weekly gaming going for at least some of my friends. Had to get comfortable there. All right, so what is this video all about? Well, this is my first video in this series in which I will be talking about all things gaming. And when I talk about gaming, I'm mostly talking about tabletop role-playing games, although I may branch out on occasion to wargaming or board games or video games. But for the most part, it's going to be tabletop RPGs, because that's really where my passion is, and that's where I find the most enjoyment of spending my time. And that's what I do. I'm a DM. I'm a dungeon master. I run games. I like to create my own adventures. And this is my thing. And I've been doing it for 35 years. And this video is basically me coming on and talking about it with my friends out there in internet land that I haven't met yet. But I'm sure we'd be close, tight buddies if I knew you. So I have another video series that I do. It's called Shadow the Demon Lord Talk, and it is focused on Shadow the Demon Lord, but it's very narrowly focused on that particular game. And I have interests that branch out beyond that game. Now, Shadow the Demon Lord is my favorite role-playing game currently, and it has been for the last couple of years, surpassing even Dungeons & Dragons, which was my first role-playing game. And it's currently scratching the itch that I have, but there are other games out there that I really enjoy, and I want to try a lot of games that I haven't been able to try as of yet. So this video series that I'm doing is going to be talking about all aspects of gaming across the spectrum of gaming genres, gaming games, everything that has to do with using your imagination and sharing experience with your friends over the course of an evening or a few hours or an afternoon. So that's what the series is about. So for this introductory video, I just wanted to give a brief introduction of myself and what this video series is going to be about, which I just did. Now, as far as myself goes, I am nobody, really. I'm just a dude like you that runs games. I have a webcam, I've got a computer, and I have an internet connection that lets me connect to all of you people out there in the world. And the only thing stopping me from using all of these components to create this has been laziness for the most part, and something interesting to talk about. Which that last part really is kind of dumb, because gaming is interesting to talk about just in and of itself. And I enjoy watching videos similar to this on the internet, and there's just not enough of them. I really enjoy watching other DMs and other players out there just talking about what they enjoy about their games, talking about their games, talking about the thought process behind developing their games, some of the problems that they encounter during their games, how they overcome it, some of the good times, some of the stories, all of these things I enjoy. And there's just not enough of those types of videos out there. Way too many actual play videos, and those bore me to tears. I can't stand actual play videos for the most part. There are a few that are good. Most of them are just way too long, and I just don't get it. But that's just me. As far as this type of video, this is different. This is a conversation that I'm having with my internet friends about a shared love for gaming. And that's what I hope to accomplish with this series. And like I said, I really don't have a specific game in mind when I'm talking about this, but I can tell you that probably the majority of what I talk about is going to be focused around fantasy role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, Shadow the Demon Lord, and similar games like that. Simply because that's just like that's the elephant in the room. I mean, that is the biggest player in the game is Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role-playing game. Everything else just kind of falls into a far second place behind it. And I really don't know why, because I think all of those things have their place. But I have my suspicions. I think some of it has to do with just the lack of people running these games. And the rep that, role-playing games have had for so long have made it difficult to get people actually into trying out a role-playing game, let alone trying out a role-playing game that's not, the top game, which is Dungeons and Dragons. If you manage to talk somebody into playing a role-playing game, chances are it's going to be Dungeons and Dragons. Now, whether from that experience they go on to try out other role-playing games, D&D can be a gateway game. Very easily. It was for me. I started off with D&D in the 9th grade, which was 35 years ago or more. Something like that. 40 years ago? Damn. It's been a long time. But that's how I got into role-playing games, through the D&D club at school. And it wasn't really long from there that I started getting into, or branching out into, other games. So I don't exactly recall the progression, but I was heavily into comic books back then. So it wasn't long after being introduced to role-playing games that I found out about Villains and Vigilantes, which was a superhero game. And it was from a very small independent press. And but it was a similar type of game. You rolled a D20, you rolled up superheroes, you fought supervillains, there were maps, there were adventure modules. In fact, I've got my old Villains and Vigilantes game around here somewhere. It's probably either up there or up there, and it's too far away for me to grab. But I still have it, and it's 40 years old, 30, 35 years old, whatever. And it's in terrible shape because I've read through it so often that the book is in terrible shape. But I loved it. I loved the game back then. I was terrible at running it. I remember distinctly one adventure where I wanted to throw Galactus at my friends. Yes, Galactus. The dude that eats worlds. Him. And just because I wanted to see how it would work out, and it didn't work out well. But I wanted to try it. And that game gave me an opportunity to do that. Whereas without that game, the only way I had of experiencing my love of comic books was through reading comic books and drawing pictures. That's it. I didn't have a way of expressing the fun of the comic book experience outside of those two things. But Villains and Vigilantes gave me an outlet that I could share my love of that genre with my friends. And it was great while it lasted. Then another superhero game came out, Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, the Phase Rip game. I bought it, but I never got a chance to run it. And that makes me sad to this day. I want to run a Marvel Phase Rip game. I've got a Roll20 site set up all for it, but my friends really just aren't into superheroes as much as I am. I have one friend, but trying to get him and a couple other guys to play it has been challenging. So yeah, it's really difficult to, as an adult, to find like-minded folks. Actually easier today than it has been because, you've got things like Roll20. You've got the looking for game boards there on Reddit and various platforms. So it's easier to find a game. But finding a game that you can enjoy with the people that you already know is challenging. Finding it with strangers, that's less challenging, but then you're dealing with strangers. And I'm not good with strangers because I'm an introvert. But at any rate, so Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, I will play that game one day. I will run it. Oh, yes, I will run it. So that is, that was one of the other games that came along fairly quickly. And then we started branching out into other games like Gamma World. I remember trying that out in the 90s. It was fun. We didn't play too much of that, but we played a little bit. It was very enjoyable. Different. It was a different experience in D&D. I remember in that game, we actually, we wanted the setting to be our hometown, which was different because, D&D is in a fantasy world. That's not anything that you recognize, right? It's a totally different, environment. Nice for my pop-ups to show up right in the middle of my video stream. But yeah, I mean, Gamma World gave us an opportunity of actually creating a role-playing experience in our hometown, in the far future after a nuclear war. But still, it gave us that opportunity, and it was fun. It was different. So Gamma World was great. Then we started branching out into different things. Second edition D&D came along. We were heavy into that. We did, my friends tried games like Twilight 2000, which I really didn't play. I'm not into the whole military gaming myself, but, they played the shit out of it. And then real life hit. In the 90s, real life hit. There was a lot of separation that happened in our gaming group between work and school and relationships. I met my wife, we got married, had a kid. All of that took place in the 90s. So there was a gap there of several years where gaming was non-existent for me. Although I still had a love for it, I wanted to game. I just didn't really have an opportunity and time to game. And there wasn't an online way to game because back then we had, America Online and Netscape and, social media was relegated to, your message boards, basically. So it was a different time and the opportunities just weren't there. So fast forward a bit to when third edition D&D came out. My child was old enough for me to be able to get some of my interest, get some time for my interests again. And then managed to get some of my friends back together for some D&D. And we had this nice 1 to 20 level, 1st to 20th level, 3rd edition D&D campaign. It was fantastic. To this day, I just enjoyed the hell out of that campaign. And it was the first campaign that I came back to after this long hiatus of not gaming. And during that time frame, we had a lot of things happening in the world that started shifting the perception of how this genre and games are really accepted. Lord of the Rings became an actual movie trilogy that won Oscars and was widely accepted by normal people. That opened up, I think, huge opportunities for games like D&D to become more mainstream, though that would happen, still several years down the road. That was one of the things that helped. Superhero movies started becoming not shitty. We had the Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. We had the X-Men movies. Again, bringing yet another nerd, what was once just a realm for nerds, was becoming more mainstream. And this slow progression from mainstream from niche to mainstream has really helped to bring my favorite hobbies out into the sun from the shadows and expose them to an entire generation of people that helped bring the state of gaming to what it is today, more widely accepted and almost mainstream. Super close. And then, you started getting things like EverQuest and World of Warcraft and Diablo and StarCraft and all those types of video games coming out, also pushing the envelope on what's acceptable in mainstream for fantasy and science fiction genres. And, it was just the last 25 years have been just really good for getting all the things that I enjoyed as a child to be accepted by everybody else in the world, or most everybody else anyway. So getting back to my gaming experience is that, we got back into D&D, and it was pretty heavily D&D for several years after that. Didn't really branch out into much other stuff, although I did still want to, I still had an interest in different games. Star Wars was something that I always wanted to play, and some of my friends kind of dabbled in the West End Games version of Star Wars, but I never really did because I was during that gaming hiatus. But when Wizards of the Coast came out with their D20 version and ultimately their Saga edition of the Star Wars game, I was all in on that. So I purchased a lot of the Star Wars books, ran a few games, and enjoyed the hell out of that. And, there were other science fiction games that I was wanting to play. There was a series that came out in the 90s, and I collected all the books, but never really got the chance to run it. And it was the Alternity game from TSR back before they were purchased by Wizards of the Coast. And I'm talking about this game right here. Alternity. And it was a D20 based game, but it was built differently and had different mechanics. And I was fascinated by this because it really opened up the world of science fiction gaming that I didn't know existed. And I wanted to play this game so badly, but never got a chance to because of life. So that game came and went. And then we also had a game produced by Wizards of the Coast, or was it still TSR? No, it's Wizards of the Coast by then. That was D20 Modern. And D20 Modern basically brought role-playing into today's world. If you wanted to play a spy, or you wanted to play a military hero, or whatever. This opened the door for that. And then from this were spawned ways of playing fantasy games in a modern arena, which was really kind of unheard of. Unless you were into a very small segment of novels that was just starting to come into their own, known as modern Arcana, I think, or modern fantasy, which is basically fantasy elements set in today's world rather than set in some kind of fantasy world. So right around this time, I started reading a series of books called The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And this was a modern fantasy series. It's basically a dude that was a wizard, an actual wizard that practiced magic, living in Chicago, and he was a private detective. So to this day, that's one of my favorite novel series. And little did I know that there was a whole bunch of books like that out there. Some focused on vampires, some focused on werewolves, some focused on necromancers. But it took all of these fantasy elements and brought them into a modern place. And we had role-playing games that replicated this. So you had, you had, trying to dig my books out, you had the D20 Modern books birthed D20 Future, which took the place of Alternity. Unfortunately, it wasn't as good, but it took the place of Alternity. Then you had Dark Matter. This was a way to play games that were based off of like the X-Files. Another game I really, really, really wanted to play or run. Never got to. The Menace Manual was your monster manual for modern games. And then you had the granddaddy, I think, of the D20 era, Urban Arcana. This game here would have allowed me to run a Dresden Files game, but I didn't. Actually, I ran one game, I think. It's kind of fun. I had a dumpster that was a mimic. But anyway, this was set up for that purpose. And this was in the early 2000s. And, that whole series of books came out. We also had a Call of Cthulhu D20 book come out. Lots of games were translated into the D20 system. For various genres, but there were still other games out there that had nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast and nothing to do with the D20 system that were still interesting in and of themselves and worthy of checking out. Call of Cthulhu, which was actually not a D20 game initially, it was a game based off of I forget what the engine is called, but it's a percentile based game, and that engine kind of spawned other games that were based off of other fantasy products like Michael Moorcock's Elric series. But at any rate, the Call of Cthulhu games were a thing in and of themselves, which that has been revitalized recently as well. But we played spattering of Call of Cthulhu games back in the day, and very memorable, very fun, very evocative. But I to this day I would love to play more Call of Cthulhu because it's just a super fun game. But fast forward a bit, we had 4th edition come out that really threw a wrench into the gaming community. We had the advent of online gaming start up with various virtual tabletops coming out. And then we had 5th edition D&D start up. We had lots of different games that were spawned from 4th edition's, I want to say marketplace failure. Before 5th edition, 4th edition came out and really kind of threw a wrench into gaming, but that wrench kind of spawned a different type of renaissance. So you had different games based off of D&D, but wasn't D&D. So you had Pathfinder created. You had a game called 13th Age that was created. You had Shadow of the Demon Lord created. Just a Dungeon Crawl Classics. This whole genre of old school revival, which sought to create games that harkened back to the 1st edition and pre-1st edition feel of the game. All of that happened, in the 2010s, the 2000s and the 2010s decades. And then 5th edition came out. That in conjunction with the advent of streaming games and people actually being able to see what a D&D game looks like, I just kind of exploded RPGs into the current era, which is pretty much where we're at today. And I have to say that there is just an embarrassment of riches for gaming out there, and just not enough time to do it all. I game once a week on Tuesday nights, and if I'm lucky, I can get my friends together on a Saturday to do some form of gaming. Right now, they're into tabletop gaming with Warhammer 40K. Which is another hobby that we've had since the 80s. And so between my Tuesday night game, my Saturday game, not a whole lot of time for anything else other than working full time and being a good husband. But it's just such a huge opportunity for gaming right now that it's just never been a better time to be a gamer. And so that's what this video series is celebrating. Being a gamer, talking about the games that we love, and just celebrating it and enjoying the conversation. So I hope you stick with me on this series. My next few videos are going to be a little bit more focused. They're not quite going to be all over the place like this one was. But I hope to talk about things that are interesting to me, and hopefully, as a side effect, interesting to you. and talk about some tips and tricks, not ticks and trips. But how I run my games. I run my games online, so what tools do I use for that? Is online gaming better than tabletop gaming, or is tabletop gaming better? There's a nice little conversation that's not going to spark any controversy whatsoever. But just having those conversations, and I enjoy those, and I want to have more of them. So that's why I'm starting this video series, and I hope that you join me. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. But I would like to thank you for joining my initial video broadcast. If you liked it, please like me on YouTube. It helps make my videos more visible using the YouTube algorithm. The more likes you get, the more visible your videos become. If you interact with me in the comment section, that helps the algorithm as well. So if you have any thoughts on any of my videos, feel free to speak up. You agree with me, you disagree with me, you think I'm an idiot, you think I'm cool, you think I suck, whatever. Just throw it up there. Let the world decide. I care not. I just want to have some good interaction with the folks out there in internet land that share the same interests that I do. So with that, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you next time.